Hello and welcome back to the Consistency Project Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that will help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, and how are you, E.C.?
Great. How are you?
Wondrous. It's good to see you. We're going to do something. We haven't done this in a minute. I think it's actually been quite a number of months since we've done a quick bites, and we're gonna make up for it by doing a back-to-back quick bites. So this week and next week we had 10 really good questions come in across various platforms and ways that people reach out to you. We had 10 really good questions. Instead of us trying to jam in quick answers to all 10, we thought, well, let's just go back to quick bites. We're gonna do 5 questions in each one of these next couple episodes, spend about 5 or 6 minutes on each question. We are going to have questions this time around, but balancing different types of exercise and weekly routine, weightlifting recommendations and progression, exercise adjustments for women in perimenopause and menopause, effective exercise forms for mid-40s women, and determining when electrolyte supplementation is necessary. And if you've noticed that there is a theme there, we got some fitness-related questions this week and next week. Yes, we're going to get into the gym this time around. So we're just going to jump right into it, yeah?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay, first question is regarding a healthy split of heavy lifting, cardio, and high-intensity training, or HIIT, inside of a week. And we've talked about this before, but your answer tends to be many people will benefit from 1 to 2 days a week of strength, 1 to 2 days a week of HIIT, and 1 to 2 days per week of cardio for overall health, weight, and fitness goals, and maybe wealth goals as well. Yeah. Who knows? And so this was the question. This is from Marissa. This is a follow-up to that general recommendation, which is doing sprint interval training with 6 reps 2 times a week okay instead of HIIT? So we maybe need to parse some words there. So where do we want to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to start with, like, what the heck is HIIT?
Yeah.
And so HIIT, high-intensity interval training, takes on lots of different forms. Generally, if you want to kind of paint with a broad brush, when somebody says they're doing a HIIT, we're often thinking about kind of up to 20 minutes where you're doing these different less than 90-second high-intensity efforts on different exercises. So you're going to kind of do this sprint. It might only be 20 seconds. It might be 45 seconds. It might be up to these 90 seconds. Exercise, then you're going to stop, take a rest, and then you're going to switch exercise and do something else. Generally, we don't consider CrossFit HIIT, very broad brush in how we see these different styles play out. I would say CrossFit tends to include heavier and longer cardio workouts, but kind of the short, heavy breathing CrossFit workouts are also different than kind of classic HIIT because of the movement selection. And we often find more weight is used even within those really breathy interval stuff than kind of classic HIIT. A lot of classic HIIT's going to be more of the boot camp classes where it's a lot of sprint interval stuff, a lot of body weight stuff. So maybe it's like high knees and butt kickers and push-ups and squat jumps and all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem here is HIIT doesn't really have a single formal definition. I'm painting in really broad brushes how you see it play out in, like, say, gyms and classes, right? So a lot of this stuff, as always, is really up to the athlete or the coach in exactly how they're applying it. Like, you could find some, I don't know, gyms where their HIIT class looks a lot like CrossFit, for example, right? Okay. Now, before exactly getting to Marusa's question, I do think I have to reiterate a couple things because I think some of this shows how we can get in the weeds. So regardless of how you interpret HIIT in terms of the exact time, am I doing it for 20 minutes? Am I doing it for 15 minutes? And the rep scheme, am I doing the 6 reps as Marusa suggested or 20 reps, something like that, is almost inconsequential to actually working out 5 to 6 days a week with the variety I mentioned. So if you're doing a split for general health, weight, and fitness goals that has these kind of 1 to 2 heavier days, 1 to 2 HIIT-ish days, and 1 to 2 cardio days, getting any more specific than that is probably going to be inconsequential. I mean, remember, it's close to 77% of people aren't even doing that. So right there, you've put yourself in an entirely separate category, an entirely separate echelon of the people that on average are living to 76 years old with comorbidities. Like, you're in a totally different ballpark already. And then the next most important thing is always going to be effort over specifics. And I know we've said this, but I we cannot be so worried about, am I doing 4 reps or 5 reps, or am I doing, 20 minutes or 25 minutes? How are you challenging yourself in those minutes and in those reps is always going to trump the exact perfect program. And so, like, there really needs to be this intention that when you work out, that you are going to try to get better or try to move faster or try to lift heavier, more so than like, well, this week I'm going to really make it wacky by doing 7 reps. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so this intent combined with that kind of variety split I mentioned is going to even further move you into another upper echelon of health. And so those need to be there before we start arguing about, okay, is 6 reps better than 8 reps?
Mm-hmm.
Not to dodge Marusa's question completely, to really get to that answer, you want to think about it as whatever I am training is what I'm going to get better at. And so if you really want to get better at kind of a 6 rep range, which is going to allow you to move heavier weights and potentially move faster, then that's what a HIIT split that focuses more on these 6 reps, as Marusa suggested, than necessarily maybe doing 20 reps or 50 reps. And this is where I think CrossFit is quite good. For a lot of people, I don't want to get good at only 6 reps of a kettlebell swing. I might also do 50 reps, and that's okay. And there's some benefits there to having endurance and muscle stamina of the 50 reps versus more of a power and a speed aspect of the 6 reps. And so in my opinion, I don't think that the individual has to necessarily really focus on, I'm only going to do a specific rep range when I'm doing HIIT stuff, and instead still keep some variation within the rep ranges of what would look like HIIT. So shorter workouts, 10, 20 minutes, move between a few different exercises, change the rep scheme. I think that's going to be what a lot of people want. But for somebody who's, again, already doing some strength training and already doing some longer cardio pieces and also doing these HIIT pieces, if they just stay at 6 rep ranges, you are so head and shoulders in terms of health and fitness and overall wellness that it won't really matter. Is there maybe some benefit of mixing it up more, maybe for kind of the unknown and the unknowable, as CrossFit likes to talk about? But you're so far ahead of what you need in life and just to enjoy a high quality of life that the very, very short answer to the question is you'll be fine. Yes, you can replace classic HIIT with the sprint interval training of six reps.
And you'll be fine. I should know this, but I don't know my history here. Was CrossFit popularized before HIIT, or was HIIT around and then CrossFit? Do you have any sense of that? Not that it matters at all for this question, but
yeah, in my opinion, and of course I'm probably biased, I think that HIIT became more popular post CrossFit, and a lot of times it's because it's the big box gym interpretation of CrossFit with lighter weights, big group X classes. And look, there's a lot of value there. Again, I know I'm like beating a dead horse here, but 77% of people are not getting enough. It's like the fruit and vegetable thing. Like people want to ask, like, are peppers better than tomatoes? And it's like, oh my gosh, eat the peppers and the tomatoes. We're not worried about it. It's the same thing about exercises. We can get so in the weeds. And I get it. For exercise enthusiasts, we really want to latch on to some of these details when in reality, for a lot of our goals, just having some variety and intent is going to get you there. So I know that wasn't your question. I went on another rant that I've already ranted on before, but I do think that the HIIT explosion is definitely kind of on some of the CrossFit explosion. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Let's jump into our second question. And this is in response to a post that you did about needing to progress in weight with weightlifting. Mm-hmm. And so this question is from Julia. What recommendations do you have for weightlifting? Is it as simple as a bit more each time?
Yeah. So we're going to get in the really nitty gritty of specifics here. I mean, very conceptually, a little bit more each time. But remember, weightlifting really can be accomplished with lots of different rep schemes, with lots of different loadings. And so there can be different outcomes. If you are lifting a weight that you can only lift for 1 to 3 reps, this is going to be working more of your max strength capacity. And as you lower the weight and the more reps you can do at that weight, the adaptation becomes less about strength and more about muscle stamina and endurance. And of course, there's value to both of those. And so this means the weights are going to range depending on kind of what you're targeting. And they also might not go up at every time because we don't adapt that fast. Unfortunately, after some of our newbie gains, we don't just like keep putting on strength and muscle endurance at the same rate. Unfortunately, it would be nice if all weightlifting was like the first 6 months of weightlifting.
We'd be superheroes.
But it starts to plateau. But anyway, I thought, instead of taking generalities, let's just go through a tangible example. Let's take the time to do it, right? So let's just take a standard leg press at a gym. It could be a back squat. If you're at a CrossFit gym, that's fine. So some days you're going to want to do like 5 sets of 3 reps. Some days you might do something more like 5 sets of 5 to 8 reps. And some days it might be 5 sets of 10 to 12 reps. Now, even those sets can change, but we're going to try to not get into every permutation of all of this. But the weights that I would use for 3 reps is very different than the weight I would use for 5 to 8 reps, is very different than the weight that I would use for 10 to 12. And so I think what's important here is, especially if you don't know what the weight is where you'll be challenged at 3 reps or what the weight is where you would be challenged at 5 reps, you have to figure that out. And this is where, I know we talked about this in a recent podcast, the importance of kind of warming up when we're doing resistance training, is that's a great time for you to feel out what would be an appropriate weight, such that when you get to these working sets, let's say it's the 5 sets of the 3 reps, that those working sets of the 3 reps are actually, each of those are challenging yourself. It's not like, okay, I did a set of 3 and I'm getting warmer, and I'm doing another set of 3 and I'm getting warmer. We want all of those to be challenging. And so you might need, especially if you haven't been lifting very long, a little bit longer period of a warm-up time to figure out what is the weight for each of these different rep ranges that is going to be appropriate for me. And then once I find that weight, let's just say 135 is challenging for reps of 3. Yes, I want that weight to increase over time, but it's, again, not going to be every week I can slap 5 pounds on. And some of this is what you learn by weight training, is like, what's a realistic jump? So a lot of this comes in the judgment of you going through the experience, you feeling how difficult it is. You add 5s, let's say, and you're like, wow, that's really difficult. I can't do all 3 reps. And then knowing that that's too much. And so what you want to be able to do, let's say that the goal was the 5 sets of the 3 reps, is you want to get through that weight of all of the 5 sets of the 3 reps, completing the 3 reps, and completing the 3 reps with confidence. Then that would be a good indication the next week that you would want to go up. And maybe the next week when you go up, maybe you add the 5s on each side. Maybe you get 3 sets of 3 reps, and then you do 2 sets of 2 reps, because that's as much as you can do. You were challenging yourself. You couldn't get another rep done. And that's a good place to stay for a while until you're able to then demonstrate competency at the 5 sets of the 3 reps. And so there is a good amount of, feeling it out, testing it out, seeing where you fall. And I always encourage people to kind of move slow and with good form before you just slap on the weight and all that stuff. And so this just takes a lot of time. And this is also why a lot of people walking around the gym have their logbook with them, or at a CrossFit gym are recording workouts, because it's really hard to keep track of, okay, well, what do I do on the back squat versus the deadlift versus the shoulder press, especially if this is not like your main hobby and your profession, right?
In other words, you're not addicted to it like some people
Right.
are.
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't been doing this for years and years and you don't know your numbers, you're probably going to want to have a logbook such that every single time you start a new exercise, you're not like, what the heck is this one? Right. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't do a ton of recording anymore. Partially because I've doing this for a long time. I know generally where I'm going to be on lifts. And then whatever rep range I choose, because again, there's variety in me doing heavy for 3, heavy for 5, heavy for 12. Whatever variety I choose that day, I work to challenge myself at that weight. And is that the best way to optimize my strength and performance? No. Is this a way that I can increase muscle mass and or maintain my muscle mass and body comp and general health and wellness goals? 100% yes. So there are going to be times when having this perfect log of everything I don't think is necessary for general body comp and wellness goals. It's certainly not going to make me, going to the CrossFit Games, but I think there's ways that people can still challenge themselves with whatever rep range they choose, even if they don't have kind of the perfect record of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. There's also, I think, an element of, and you sort of alluded to this a little bit, but you might come in on one, Tuesday, and then the next Tuesday you've got back squats again, and just like you didn't sleep as well, or
Exactly.
any number of things could have affected it, and so that will also sometimes preclude you from bumping up a little bit, even though you thought, last Tuesday I thought, okay, I'm going to add some weight, but today I just don't have it. And I think there's also an element of that where it's like, no, you're not going to make gains every single week, because every single week's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. It's never one thing. There's always these other factors that come into play, especially with performance, as you mentioned. And so I think what's really nice about the numbers is it helps you have like some idea. You don't want to be back squatting, 65 pounds when 135 is really easy. But a lot of times with enough experience, you already know what those numbers are. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so this next question is from Shuri. What, if any, adjustments need to be made to exercise when we're in peri or menopause? So perimenopause or menopause.
Yeah, the short answer here is none, at least conceptually. And when I say that, though, you have to know I'm assuming that your baseline is the split that we kind of kicked things off with. Like, I'm assuming that when you are not in perimenopause, before perimenopause and menopause, that you are doing 1 to 2 days a week of strength training and 1 to 2 days a week of HIIT and 1 to 2 days a week of cardio, and you're challenging yourself. Reoccurring theme here, right? Like, I'm assuming that was already in place such that when perimenopause hits, like, you would just kind of keep going. But I think what happens, as we've sort of discussed in the menopause episode, is that women in their mid to late 40s and beyond start to notice this body composition shift. And a lot of it is really just that life has caught up with them, so to speak. A little bit more focus on career, a little bit more focus on family. That gets the energy, that gets the attention, that gets even the intensity, if you will. And then the workouts become harder to fit in. And there goes the consistency intensity, which is such an important part of seeing the results there. And of course, we have to remember with perimenopause and menopause that there also are some symptoms around it for some women that make it hard to be consistent and hard to, challenge yourself. Like, if you have a ton of fatigue because of menopause, or a lot of hot flashes that are very severe, or insomnia, like telling, somebody like, okay, go run your PR 5K time, or today's the day that we're really going to do the 1 rep max deadlift, it's a little out of touch, right? So there can be, because of these factors, some either life factors or even the symptoms associated with menopause. We often see a decline in muscle mass, then affecting body comp, and of course then their ultimate caloric need, because they're not able to kind of keep up with that routine, consistency, and intensity. And oftentimes they do gain weight. I will also say, specific to perimenopause and menopause, the decline on hormones will make it harder for women to put on muscle comparatively than when they were 25. But the concept is the same, that if you want to build muscle when you're in perimenopause or menopause, you have to challenge yourself and you have to lift weights, right? Like, it'll still happen. It's just not going to happen like it was if you were 25. And if I had to paint with a broad brush, which I seem to be doing in this podcast, women on average do not do a ton of resistance training. And when they do, it's a little bit more of this 8 to 12 rep range. And I would say without a lot of challenge. And again, this is my observation being in gyms 5 days a week since middle school. I would say a lot of times women are kind of a little bit more of the check the box, let me get through this and be done, and let me stay with the lighter weights, than kind of what we might see more in a CrossFit gym and trying to make some improvements on the weight that they were lifting. So if you want to make serious body composition changes in your 40s, I think that if you haven't been doing that, you're going to find that you have to, quote, change what you're doing. And you'll feel like, oh gosh, now I all of a sudden have to do resistance training. And oh gosh, now I really have to push myself harder than I was doing before. So it might feel to you individually that you're doing something much different, but it's really the same principles that I would have wanted you doing when you were 30. And really, if you had been doing them with some consistency, then the change wouldn't really need to be there later in life.
Got it. Question number 4 is from Amy. I'm curious about your thoughts on the best form of exercise, specifically for mid-40s women. Do you think that CrossFit 4 times a week is sufficient to build muscle for this demographic, or is there sufficient evidence to support the idea that more focused strength training and separate cardio is superior?
Yeah, theme of these questions. These are very popular questions, very common questions. And I think we kind of already sort of answered this. But I think the main takeaway here is, yes, CrossFit can definitely be effective. But the other takeaway is, so can a split of weightlifting and cardio sessions, because it's more important how those sessions are carried out, effort, i.e. effort, than what exactly is listed for the workout. Like, you can go to CrossFit 4 times a week, but again, if you're not really challenging yourself, you're not going to see the same improvements as if you were to do cardio and weight training split, but you were challenging yourself. And again, broad brush, women tend to want to lift lighter weights. They tend to want to get through the workouts faster. And this can also be just a reflection of the programming at the gym, not just a women-men thing, but generally sometimes gyms will bias kind of the lighter sweat fest simply because those tend to be more popular, a la HIIT classes at big box gyms, than necessarily the 5x5 back squat or the weighted pull-ups day or something like that. And so, I think sometimes those strength aspects, even when people are doing regular CrossFit, can kind of fall by the wayside just depending on some of the programming that's happening. So ultimately, yes, it can be effective. Look at those 4 days a week that you're doing. Do you have some smattering of kind of the classic CrossFit heavy breathing Metcons? Do you have some of the strength only days? And do you also have just some longer cardio days? And if you're doing that and challenging yourself within the 4 days a week, then yeah, it's great. You don't have to switch to a split.
I like what you said earlier to the earlier question, effort over specifics. I just think that's worth repeating a couple times because it's
over and over again. It's like 5 reps or 6 reps. Doesn't matter. Is it hard?
Yep.
Now, gosh, I'm in a chatty mood today, but like, I get it that not every day, and for the reasons that you mentioned, not every day can you feel like you're going to chew through concrete. Like not every day is it going to be this 100% like can't even walk after the session, and nor does it need to be. But if we're rushing through the stuff and we're just doing it to, quote, get the exercise done, I'd rather you do less with more intention, and the results will compound there versus like just check the box, read the book on the stationary bike.
Last question we've got is from Wileen. How do you determine if or when you actually do need electrolytes/sodium? Someone who runs and sweats a good amount plus isn't quote unquote average gym goer, would they need electrolytes and or sodium?
Yeah. You know me, I always like to set the context before I can answer a question, Patrick. So we're going to do that here.
You like to answer the question that isn't asked before you can answer the question that is asked?
Right.
Yes.
I mean, it's an attempt to help people be able to start answering their own questions. And the one that I would try to first answer back here before getting into the specifics is like, how would you know if you needed more of anything? Like, do I need more protein? Do I need more sodium? Do I need more speed in my running? Do I need more pounds on my back squat? Like the first thing you have to know to be able to answer that question is, well, what am I currently doing? Or what is my current baseline? I know it's easy to want this answer of, yes, everybody needs electrolyte supplementation who runs and does CrossFit. But ultimately, we have to know what the current baseline is. And then also, really, in addition to that, we'd have to know what are your goals relative to that intake, right? Like, how do you know if you need more protein? Yes, we have to know your baseline, but then we have to know, well, do you want to build more muscle mass? Do we want to increase your back squat to be able to then say, okay, yes, you should increase, decrease, or stay the same. Okay, so applying that concept to sodium, the first step would be of how much are you actually eating? Now, the good news here is that sodium is on nutrition labels. It's been on nutrition labels forever, so it's quite easy to find. It's quite consistent. And so what you would want to do is you want to weigh and measure your food for a few days so you can get a sense of what is your current sodium intake. That's the main electrolyte. That's why we're focusing on it. Mm-hmm. We also have to remember that if you salt any of your food, like if you do scrambled eggs and you salt it, that won't be captured by nutrition labels. So for most people, what an app is capturing is actually a little bit biased low relative to their true consumption, because assuming people use salt. Now, the average intake for Americans for sodium is 3,300 milligrams of sodium a day. The RDA is 2,300 milligrams per day. So on average, it's very likely that you're over a third over what you need to be getting. So even the average gym goer plus running, on average, they are going to be still plenty of sodium because the average intake of sodium is so high. But that's just off the cuff on average. To truly know, we would have to first look at that. The other thing that we would have to know, now looking at some of the other factors I said, like what are the person's goals, is besides your sodium intake, we would have to also know if your sodium loss during these efforts is enough to necessitate supplementation so that you have better performance. And the way that you go about doing that is the first thing that you'd probably want to look at is, hey, do I lose at least 3% of my body weight during these sessions? So what you'd actually have to do, let's take the running example, is you'd weigh your body weight before and after and make sure that you're not standing in drenched clothing because they weigh heavier, to see if your body weight is a difference of at least 3% or more. And so on a 150-pound person, that's about a 4.5-pound loss across this, quote, sweaty workout. Now, why am I choosing 3%? Well, 1 to 2% dehydration is a normal level of dehydration that can be corrected just by drinking water to thirst. And it's around 3% or greater, you may be in the territory where you actually need some of the electrolyte supplementation to help retain enough of that water coming in to build yourself back up to 0% dehydration. And we talked about this in great detail in the electrolytes episodes that we'll put in the show notes. But that's really what we're first going to have to do. Do you even lose enough water that this is a problem? And then let's just say that you are someone who you do see that you have this larger water loss during these sweaty sessions. We'd also have to start looking at, okay, well, now let's start supplementing, not just drinking to thirst during the run, but also drinking to thirst with electrolytes, and plot how does that affect your performance? Because not everybody who has 3% dehydration actually has worse performance. So we'd have to look at, your current sodium intake. Are you anywhere near that could be considered low? Then we have to see, do you actually lose enough water during your efforts where this could possibly be a concern? And if you do, then potentially we're going to start looking at supplementation with electrolytes relative to your performance to see that it matters, because that's ultimately what you care about. So there's a lot of steps to make these individualized recommendations. I think based on the question and how I think the volume is, I don't think that electrolyte supplementation would be needed for somebody who kind of does, let's say, running 3 to 4 times a week extra in addition to CrossFit sub 60-minute efforts.
Got it. All right. Those were our 5 questions this time around. We've got 5 more that we are queuing up. So make sure that you are subscribed wherever you are listening or watching this so that you can get next week's episode where we got 5 more fitness related questions from our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. EC, thank you. Of course, as always, we'll be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.